Okay, first I'm going to start by introducing our moderator, Dr. Sirrita Darby. Sirrita Darby is the co-founder and executive director of Detroit Heals Detroit. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, Sirrita has always been committed to combating social inequalities. As an abolitionist educator in Detroit, she saw how trauma infiltrated the lives of her students inside and outside the classroom. There, she developed a strong commitment to centering healing in her classrooms and her community. As an extension of class projects, Sirrita founded Detroit Heals Detroit alongside her students to foster healing for other Detroit youth. Sirrita earned her doctorate degree in educational leadership at Michigan State University, where she did extensive research on trauma in Black, Indigenous, and communities of color and analyzed the radical solutions necessary to combat it. She also received a master's degree from the University of Michigan and a bachelor's degree in social relations and policy from Michigan State University. Sirrita is committed to helping create Black, Indigenous, and people of color healing spaces that lift up joy, brilliance, hope, and justice, promoting healing for liberation and not just for survival. Give it up for Sirrita.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that warm introduction. Happy to be here with you all today. Over the next panel, we're going to go over innovative ways of care to really address harm reduction, trauma, substance use, and violence as well. So I'm here with our amazing panelists. I'm going to go over and just introduce each of them, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. All right? So we're going to start first with Eladio Nino. Eladio is an outreach coordinator at Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. He is an ex-gang member and formerly incarcerated individual who has turned his life around, now advocating for change through community violence intervention and conducting healing circles for those affected by violence. Give it up for Eladio Nino. And then Bree Rowe. Bree works as a harm reductionist with Harm Reduction Michigan, focusing on HIV prevention, sex work, advocacy, harm reduction programs. They also co-chair the Southeastern Michigan HIV and AIDS Coalition and bring a deep commitment to community health and social justice. Give it up for Bree. Okay. And then Corn Williams. Corn is a co-director of LEAF Harm Reduction and a fierce advocate for policy change that limits community interaction with the criminal justice legal system. He's been involved in drafting policy in Washtenaw County and continues to lead the change for Black liberation and community empowerment through advocacy and harm reduction. Give it up for Corn, please. And who will be with us in spirit, and we will be hearing their audio, is Omar Warlick. Omar is a co-founder of Free People. He has dedicated his life to spiritual and personal atonement after serving 23 years in prison. Through his nonprofit and partnership with other organizations, he works to facilitate courses around compassion, accountability, grief, aiming to provide transformative change in the lives of those affected by incarceration and trauma. Give it up for Omar, please. And so we're going to go into an audio by Omar, and then our amazing panelists who are present with us today will give more background about their work and amazing transformative work that they're doing.
I'm Omar Warlick, co-founder of Steps of Life, co-founder of Free People Movement, and we blatantly ventured off into what we call the Prisoner Project, where we're dealing with youth development, and I'm the co-founder there as well. Well, today we want to deal with mental health. Mental health, as I know this particular forum is set up around mental health. And how we define mental health today, one of the things that's imperative to understanding our personalities or personages. We can't all be grouped into one category, as we all are not monolithic. Most of us in this world, particularly the young world, looks at mental health in a stigmatizing way that personalizes us as being crazy or unfit for society. How we deal with mental health in prison may be somewhat different than the norm, but we are living in an abnormal environment that doesn't really shape persons to be perfected. Oprah Winfrey and neurologist Dr. Bruce Perry wrote a book called What Happened to You, and it deals with how the brain's work we do some of the things that we do. And he stated in his book, I quote, "Your personal history that people and places are effective in your life influence your brain's development. The result is that each of our brains is unique. Our life experiences shape the way that key systems in our brain organize and function," end quote. So each of us sees and understands the world based on that particular system. So if you grew up in Big Mama's house and she carried on particular functions, this was etched in the brain as how the world may work, because we all use our five senses as we come up and evolve through our young adolescent years and create these systems to operate in the world as well. So Big Mama House may not have been the right place or environment that we received the proper tools to function in the world. And even in our communities, most of our systems are formed out of ignorance of the culture. Through secular practices we grew up learning in abusive, drug addictive, and violent households and communities. So mental health is the sense of describing you in a maladaptive methodological practices that become adaptive and inform our life experiences. They just don't work for civilized society. How we get on the front end of this is making sure that we start in the schools, understanding what's being fed to our youth, to the minds of our children. Got to train them up in the growth mindset. And what that means is we have to teach them how things work, how to really look at things, actually how to think and take things in a proper context and seeing themselves outside of what is the norm. What the norm is bringing social anxieties into our households, into the minds of these youth, where they feel like they have to live up to a particular standard or look a particular way, which creates other mental compartments in our head that formulate mental illnesses. So on the back end of that, what we do when we come here, when children or adults come here, children to young adults come here in prison, we create these programs that help them develop into their emotional literacy. This is really how we tap into the feelings in that moment, how to process what we're going through, manage the emotion to be more proactive versus reactive. We've been having some great success with some of these classes as we taught men through our compassion and accountability classes. And what this does is help a person tap into the compassion of how would you feel if somebody committed a crime against one of your family members or yourself, and then make men step up to take accountability. So this puts us in the mindset of what the victim may have experienced through being victimized, as some of us as being perpetrators. And then we have a grief and loss class that deals with managing grief. There's a grief process that we go through when people lose their freedom. You're dealing with loss and what comes around dealing with loss. How do we deal with that? How do we go through the mental process of breaking that down to understand we're in a new environment, we're in a new world, and process and putting everything in context? Because some of this comes along with the mental health aspect of dealing with depression, absence. So we like to tap into those particular aspects of it because we know it can be challenging when a person is coming in here off the street. But we also want to make sure that men or women are held accountable for their actions. So these are some of the things that we've been building on with Steps to Life and the Free People movement. And we just geared off into dealing with the Prisoner Project. Any questions you have?
Thank you, Omar. That was excellent. Can you share more about the Prisoner Project and exactly what you all are doing around mental health within that project?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got this class, like I said, dealing with grief and gratitude, and it's just really helping men get evolved, learn how to think. I think I read a book, and I can't remember the author, but the quote was intelligence is something that's innate, meaning that everything in the body, dealing with the 10 systems, function in a particular way that you don't have to think about it. So there's a particular intelligence that's geared in the human being. So intelligence is an innate process. we come with this. You don't have to tell sperm to go to the ovum. This process is automatically done. But thinking is the skill that must be learned. So we try to gear men around processing the feelings and emotions that they have, because we deal with feelings just out of the range of happy, mad, sad, glad. You know, it's just so extensive. And we try to help men tap into that and develop a way of thinking, a way of coping. And I think this is what's lacking. So we have to create methods that are preventative. So we've been geared toward violence interruption. You know, I think on the back end, this is one of our biggest goals, to tap into what these young men are thinking and how do we get in there to change a particular mindset.
Awesome, awesome. I love to hear that. I think the next question that's coming up for me is really around some of the successes you're seeing with the work you all are doing, and or ways that you think we can continue to press past the barriers to mental health to really dream bigger in the ways that we're responding to mental health that may be, for example, out of the box or out of the norm. We want to get away from just, like you said, stigmatizing, locking people up, but really thinking about ways to really address the root causes of mental health in a way that is not punitive and carceral. So do you have ideas about ways that we can do that, whether, out in the community or, in places or in prisons or in jails?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that I understand the question perfectly well, is that we're looking for solutions to prevent our children from being locked up, and also to prevent there being deaths when police come out to crime scenes, or they come out to a particular call that they may not understand that this person is dealing with some type of mental illness. Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we need to do is start young into the schools to really help our young people understand how to navigate a world that's so destructive right now. You know, I think that it's important that we create programs that are centered around that, and give classes to people that may be unaware. I think it needs to be a little more mental health awareness as it pertains to people some of our first responders. You know, teach them how to evaluate a person. You know, just because we look at mental health and
you have 1 minute remaining.
And real quick, I'll conclude with this. We look at mental health, and we stigmatize it as being, like I said before, someone that's crazy. And people don't always look like this. You know, what somebody is dealing with internally may not always be, highlighted on the exterior factors. So I think we need to really bridge the gap between our first responder workers, and gear them toward a real firm understanding on how to assess a situation like that. And then dealing with our youth before they come in here, we have to start young. Teach them to develop the skills on how to think, how to process what we take in, the information that we take in this world. We have to learn how to really process it.
Awesome.
If I answered that correctly.
Sure thing. I think we can keep building on that, but that was good. I appreciate that, Omar, for sure.
Yes, give it up for Omar and that insight. He mentioned giving people the tools they need to solve their own problems. And I think that's why we're here today, to really realize some of those tools, because we are the people who are going to save us, right? So we're going to hear from some of our amazing panelists to hear some of that work that we are already doing to save ourselves, right? And to be in community around trauma, harm reduction, violence, and really combating that on a systems level from the community. So we can go in any order. Who wants to just jump in and just tell us more about your work and the impact that you want to see through it?
Hi, my name's Corn. So I'm technically operating out of Washtenaw County. I have been a Detroit lover for a long time. I've been in Michigan since '06, and as soon as I got my driver's license, the first place I went was Southwest. and saw the rest of the city after that. They haven't been able to keep me out of here since. So I very much love this conversation about like how we can show up for folks who are already involved in the system. A lot of the work that we do in Washtenaw County does revolve around kind of showing up for folks who unfortunately continuously end up in the system. I want to talk more about what I would like to see than the work that we're already doing, because I think a lot of the folks here are here because we're doing the work. And I think what we need is proactive solutions and not reactive solutions. And I don't think that we can talk about proactive solutions without talking about policy and changing policy to really address systemic racism in this state, in the city, in the state, in the country. At the end of the day, the system, the outcomes that folks like us ultimately run into in the system is because it is designed to be that way. It is a top-down problem. The people who make the policies at the very top are also the people who print the money. And so to say it's about money, I think we're missing a big piece of the picture. It is this country for a very, very long time has enacted genocide on non-white people. That's just what this place is built on. So the systems that are in place now are made to maintain and perpetuate that. Unless we start to address these systems and tear them down brick by brick, the changes that we're asking for are not gonna happen, and we're gonna keep coming back to this point and talking about how do we react? What do we do once people are already almost gone? And at the end of the day, folks in the system are getting lost every single day. So like I would challenge, man, Pam said something about it feels different in here. I agree, it feels different. This is the first harm reduction convening I've been to, and it's been the majority black folks, period. The first time ever I've seen it. So that definitely gives me hope to hear the amount of high-level degrees in this room. It gives me hope. So let's do something with it. Let's use the political capital in this room to lean on the folks in this city that can make changes. You know, somebody asked a question about recipient rights in jail. Patient rights in jail, I think, is kind of a joke because you're not a human when you're in jail. So like, let's get human rights first. You know, they finally shut down Greektown out here. Some of the gravest crimes against black folks, crimes against the humanity of black folks went down in that jail, and the new justice complex is not any better. You know, the people that are in there are getting lost. Literally, they don't have access to loved ones. They don't have access to care, to case management. So like, again, when we see trends like this in, you know, historically black municipalities, we expect black leaders to do something about it. And so, again, I heard that there's somebody in the room who might be running for Detroit Police Commissioner, you know? What are we gonna do to limit the interactions that are getting young black folks locked up? Because that's what it comes down to. And who is gonna hold the officers accountable that are locking folks up for no reason? Why are police officers given discretion to take whoever they want and throw them into the system? It doesn't make any sense. So again, without accountability and without a call for real proactive change, like we're just gonna be sitting here spinning our wheels. And that's how I feel. So I would love to see real change in Wayne County. I would love to be able to say like, hey, Detroit is a city that shows up for black folks in their most vulnerable state. You know what I mean? Because that's really what we need to do. And the folks who are unhoused and the folks who are dealing with severe substance use disorder and mental illness, those are our most vulnerable folks. And you can't talk about substance use without mental illness. You know, that's one thing. Like 80% of all folks that are on record with a substance use disorder also have a co-occurring mental illness. And that's just the folks that are on record. If you ask me, like the first time I saw a therapist, I was like, man, I don't know what's going on. I'm paranoid. I think people are out to get me. I think people are trying to kill me. She didn't say, oh, you're black in America. That makes sense, right? Yeah, but so at the end of the day, like the data is great. Every single one of us in here that are melanated has PTSD because we're a part of a system that is killing us, not trying to kill us, is killing us actively. You know, so until we demand what's right, until we demand change, and we need to do it through our leadership, we need to demand it from them because they out here. Again, we're not going to see it. So I urge everybody who has, some clout, who has a PhD, who has a position of power, use it. Use it. Don't be afraid to not get elected the next time. Do the right thing and stand up for your folks. Because at the end of the day, like, we don't have no advocates out here. The folks in the jails don't have no advocates. The folks in the prisons don't have no advocates. And the people in the street don't either. And so, like, that's what we need. Is people that have the ears of politicians. We need government actors. We need folks to stand tall and make changes. So I appreciate all y'all being here.
And you can go ahead, Bree. And I want to just thank Corn for lifting up the fact that we are going to create that solution, right? Just not waiting on other people. And for the people in the room who do have letters behind their name, and quite frankly, to all the white people in the room, if you are not willing to help us create, dismantle a system that you benefit greatly from, then you probably shouldn't be in this room. So I want us all to think about that as well. Go ahead, Bree.
Thank you. My name is Bree Rowe. I use she, they pronouns, and I live over on Detroit's east side where I was born and raised. Chalmers, okay. Hey.
I like the Bree for a reason.
I know. Whenever people meet me, they're like, you have an east side vibe that I can't get rid of. And I'm like, it's in me, okay? I'm here. And one of the things that I see working in the community, right, is taking back that power and disrupting the patterns that have led us here in the first place. So for me personally, a lot of adults in my life had to invest in the carceral response in their response to my mental health issues and drug use and poverty and even healthcare issues like having hepatitis C. Every part of me at one point was criminalized. The way I made money as a sex worker, my behaviors as a drug user, and my outbursts as someone that wasn't getting mental health treatment. The adults in my life always utilized 911. That was the only response that they knew because it was the only thing available to them, and it's what we've been taught since we're this old, right? You call 911, and those are the people that you can trust, and those are the people that will come help you. And I have never had a positive experience with a police officer when I was in crisis. I have been further abused, further sexually assaulted or taken advantage of, and then incarcerated on 6-figure bonds for misdemeanors for solicitation, all right? Like, I was stuck in jail on a misdemeanor because the judge outwardly said that she does not support women, ladies like me, ladies of the night like me. Ladies of the night, okay? And a lot of people had to invest in that mentality. And so when I stepped into this role many years ago, I'm a former IV drug user. I was a heroin and crack user. Next week I'll have 11 years sober. Hey! Yeah, and so I'll have 11 years sober next week, and I got sober at Huron Valley, all right? And all 4 of my kids were taken from me when that happened. I was sent to prison, and then all 4 of my kids were sent to foster care. They paid another family $3,000 a month to take my children, and when I got released, was given $0 of anything to get up and have forward momentum in my life. I was literally left out the gate of Huron Valley with no phone, not $1 in my pocket, no driver's license, no car. I was lucky somebody even cared enough to come pick me up from there, and then they paroled me to a homeless shelter where I got further discriminated against, treated badly. I got scabies. I couldn't get treated for scabies. Like, you guys, the depths of which Huron Valley put me down, it felt like insurmountable. When I got released from prison in 2014, it felt like there was never going to be a moment where I had upward movement in the community. Because once you are a criminal, you are put in that permanent caste system, and everything that you do is used against you. I couldn't look left without somebody writing me a ticket or putting handcuffs on me. Fast forward, 11 years sober. I've been off parole since 2018. I've been off papers for a long time. I got my kids back in 2015. I fought them at the highest level of Michigan Supreme Court. Yeah. And it's not lost on me that if I was a black woman, I would not have my children at home. What I did, you don't get your kids back for. All right? It took 2 years of every ounce of privilege that I could come up with and muster as an unhoused, drug-using sex worker to even be able to see my kids in a room. So 11 years, goes by. I'm who I am now. People see me and they don't see me in that light. They don't see a criminal. I'm not a 6'2" black man. They don't cross the road when I'm walking by, even though I got more felonies than any of my neighbors on Chalmers, right? So, but I don't appear as someone that they need to fear. So I'm able to use that white privilege in any way that I can, and here I am now with 4 children that are teenagers. I have triplets that are 11 and a 13-year-old. I have 4 preteen daughters, triplets that I gave birth to after getting pregnant on State Fair as an unhoused sex worker. Like, I know Detroit and what they do in such an intimate level that anything less than full accountability from the new police commissioner is, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear nothing. I've been through too much. I've seen too much. And so I have this, my 13-year-old is queer, right? And so when I think about what we do now that makes change is that disruption of pattern. I know what it felt like to be a 13-year-old and have 911 called on me constantly put in psych wards, constantly put in juvies, or taken from my mom and given to this person, and then taken from that person and given to that person, and then given back to my mom, even though she didn't get any of the help that she needed, right? When my child came out to me, in that exact moment, it was over my dead body that I was going to my child's funeral because an adult can't get it together and respect people. Like, it is over my literal dead body that I will let anyone make my child feel less as who they are because of their queerness, because of their neurodivergency, because of their identity, their gender. It'll be over I will take all of you out and I will burn this shit down. I will do it so fast. I will light a fire. You guys, prison don't scare me. I will go back to Huron Valley so quick with the gasoline on me. All right, yes, I did that. I burnt that shit down because they thought they were gonna tell my kids something. I am not gonna be the parent that utilizes the carceral system because I don't understand my child. I don't need to understand my child or any of you to treat you well. I don't need to understand anything. Like, I truly don't. And so for me, it looks like disrupting those patterns. It looks like divesting from the carceral response. It looks like leaning into solutions that are not based in policing, in CPS, in mandatory reporting, in anything like that. And it looks like language. It looks like the way that we talk about these things. Corin brought up the police commissioner, and I did the survey, right? And I immediately, my eyes caught on to the word prostitution. And the question that you answer is, have you ever been a victim of one of the following? And when I got to that, I thought, well, how do you be a victim of that? And why is this the word that we're using? What? You can't be a victim to my consensual sex. I don't care. Be mad. Argue with yourself. Because I don't care. Like, you can't be mad. And you're not a victim of. Who is the victim are the people that are living in criminalized identities that continue to be put in cages because they don't have the capital or the letters behind their name or the last name that makes them a worthy member of society. Like, I did not have the things that I needed to be viewed as worthy of any type of help. any type of help. The reason I am who I am today is because mutual aid and harm reduction exist. I am alive because Narcan was available when I needed it. The triplets that were inside of me when I overdosed are alive because naloxone was available when they needed it as well. There are 4 people on this planet today, right here, that came from my womb that are alive because harm reduction exists. So if we want to talk about the changes that we make in our young people, we need to talk about the way that we're treating their parents, we're responding to their needs, and how we view and talk about the real issues impacting the youth here right now.
That was great. That was great. I really like that, for real. Hey, everybody. How you doing? My name is Eladio Nino. I grew up in Southwest Detroit. I was raised by a village of gang members, drug dealers, drug addicts. You know, I became a product of that environment. By the time that I was 9 years old, I was admitted into a psych ward called Aurora Hospital that's on Martin Luther King Boulevard. By the time I was 15, I was in the juvenile system, and then by the time I was 21, I was already on my way to prison to serve 17 years. So going from a residential jungle to a concrete jungle, you know. By 9 years old, what do I got going on that sends me to a mental hospital, you know? By the time I was 9 years old, I had already been sexually abused. I had already was moved into a community that was not my own. Also dealing with my mother's mental health issues. You know, my mother had crying spells from the trauma that she had endured, you know, as a child. You know, the trauma that she had endured from my father, from beating her all the time. And, you know, every time I did something wrong and my mother got upset with me, I wear the face of my father. So, you know, like they say, the sins of the fathers are passed on to the sons and the daughters. So I had to pay for my father's sins, because whatever he did to my mother did it to me, because I wear my father's face. So, you know, being moved into a community, you know, my stepdad, he was an African Cuban. He had came to Detroit in the 80s. You know, everybody who has seen the movie Scarface, you know, that's how it really happened. They came from Miami to Chicago to Detroit, and my mother had just left my father from Chicago, landed in Detroit, and you know, so in this time in the 90s in Southwest Detroit, a lot of gangs were migrating from Chicago. All the Cubans had came into town, and everybody was establishing territory. So there was a lot of war, a lot of beefs, you know, and a lot of violence going on. So my stepdad thought it would be best to get us out of that community and move us to Lincoln Park. So in the 80s, Lincoln Park is not the same community that it is today. You know, it was very racist, and, you know, every day I struggled. You know, even though we didn't have to deal with the type of violence that we were dealing with in the neighborhood, I was not prepared mentally to deal with the violence that I had to deal with, you know, living in a community around people who were not mine. You know, I was called a little nigger. My mother was called a nigger lover. I was always being jumped and beat up, and I had no confidence because nobody was rooting for me. Nobody was helping me. Nobody was cheering for me or any of that. So yeah, by the time I was 9 years old, I hated the color of my skin. I wanted to be white because I thought that was the only way I was going to be able to be successful in life. You know, so by the time you know, I was 9 years old, I had dealt with so much distress already. You know, I wanted to kill myself. So my mother sent me to see a therapist. The therapist sent me to you know, to Aurora Hospital. I bounced around for a while. I moved to Chicago. I went to Mexico. I went to East LA, you know, thinking that, you know, if I reconnected with my father, you know, that my life would get better. You know, it seemed like everywhere that I went, I was just being indoctrinated into other people's beliefs, you know. My father was a devoted Christian. You know, I was raised as a Catholic. Nobody really took time to figure out who I was, what I had been through, or, you know, all that type of stuff. Everybody had took me in, which I do appreciate, but nothing work because everybody just tried to transition and transform me into, you know, living the way that they were living. You know, so in Chicago, my family were Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm like, you know, where's the Christmas presents? My birthday's coming up. And they're like, yeah, we don't do all that. We work on holidays and all that type of stuff, you know. Living with my father, he was a devoted Christian. He went to church every day. You know, I was raised as a Catholic. I only went to church once a week, and I didn't even want to go then, you know. So it just seemed like more people were trying to, you know, initially help me, but it did more damage to me than anything, you know. And, you know, at the end of the day, I had come to realize that, you know, there's really no place like home. I didn't really have any stability. My mother didn't really know what to do with me. I was the firstborn of 3 sons raised by a single mother. I was deprived of a childhood, and the only childhood that I do remember was traumatized. I had to grow up fast. By the time I was 15 years old, I was the man of the house, you know. You know, we did not, I was not taught to value education, you know, so I dropped out of school in 9th grade because our main priority was only to survive, you know, to get through the day. And so I dropped out of school, and I was a full-time hustler with my mother. And when I wasn't hustling, I was gangbanging. And, you know, it was the first time that I really felt like, you know, I had an identity. You know what I'm saying? I had a place to call my own. I picked up my flag. You know, that was my identity. This is my nation. This is what I stand on. I got something to live for. I got something to die for, you know. You know, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, they were all in the family business of selling weed and selling cocaine. And, you know, by the time I was 17 years old, I had my daughter. And, you know, I hung around a lot of adults. And, you know, it kind of did a disservice to me because it made me grow up fast. And, you know, by the time I was 17 years old, I was doing coke, and I was high all the time on coke. And about a year later, I had looked at myself, and, you know, I couldn't believe the impact that it had in my life. You know, my life had just, you know, it had went down. I became very abusive with my daughter's mother, and then I got her to do cocaine, and then it just became, you know, a back and forth. It was about who draw first blood at that point, you know what I'm saying? And it became very abusive to the point where we ended up separating. You know, I was taught, you know, by my uncles and, you know, my older cousins, you know, their definition of what a man was, you know, somebody who provided, you know, as long as there's food on the table and there's a roof over your head and there's clothes on your back, that's a man. That's what a man does, you know? And there's so much more later on that I learned in life about fatherhood and, you know, about being a man. So then by the time I was 21, I had 3 kids. You know, I was in the streets really heavy. I loved the streets. I was devoted to the streets. And, you know, I became, you know, just a product of that environment. Going through the juvenile system. The first night that I went to juvenile, I got jumped by the opposite gang. And, you know, it just, you know, I was a young warrior, you know, and we were, you know, since I was young, I was always, you know, taught, you know, kill or be killed, you know, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, only the strong survive, you know, and so that was the mindset that I grew up with, you know, and so then, you know, eventually being in the streets, I ended up, you know, going to prison for a murder case. I was with a friend who shot and killed somebody. And, you know, I stood tall. I wouldn't, you know, testify against them. So I went for the ride. You know, I sacrificed everything, you know, for the streets and for the code of ethics of the streets and for the gang, you know, because, you know, I was always taught, you know, to stay solid, never snitch, you know, things like that. And, you know, I lost everything I had, you know. I lost the privilege of raising my own kids. And, you know, sometimes I feel like it was a blessing because had I been present and raising my kids, I would have raised them according to who I was then. You know, I was already, you know, like, you know, a lot of kids are born into a lifestyle. They don't even have the privilege of making, you know, their own choices in life. You know, I was already putting pounds of weed in their diaper bags. I was putting ounces of coke under their car seats. You know what I'm saying? They were already part of the lifestyle and part of the process. You know, I had already chose their favorite color for them. You know, blue is your favorite color. You know, they didn't have the liberty or the freedom to say, hey, I like yellow, I like red, I like this. You know, I chose the color for you. You know, so I had already took their privileges and liberty from them of doing that. going into prison, like I said, leaving a residential jungle, going into a concrete jungle. You have, people that come from everywhere, and nobody really cares who you kill, how much money you made, what gang you in, because you got killers and drug dealers and people from all over the state, and, this was a place that, really turns boys into men. It's a place that's going to make you or break you, and, I think probably for the first 12 years, I lived like an animal, that was the only way I was going to be able to survive. You were either a lamb or you were a wolf, and in order to survive amongst wolves, you had to be a wolf yourself. So, for the first 12 years, I became a product of that environment. And, we live in a bloodthirsty society. It's the same way in prison. The answer to everything is violence. And if you weren't willing to draw blood, then you were soft, you were weak, and they were going to see it, and they were going to eat off you, And I was not going to let that happen to me because, that's not what, that's not who I was, And, after 12 years in prison, I had went to the hole. I had got caught with a knife. I went to the hole for a couple months. And, as I sat in the hole, I just started doing a lot of reflecting. Sometimes being in segregation was actually a privilege for me because when you're in a population and surrounded by hundreds and thousands of people, it's really hard to really get a peace of mind. You know what I'm saying? So when I went to segregation and I was in the hole, I actually had time to do a little soul searching, to do a little, a lot of internal work and go back all the way to childhood and learn how to, forgive myself and forgive others who have violated me and went against me because I had all that resentment and all that trauma. While I was in there, I took every opportunity to victimize anybody that was in there on a pedophilia case, a sex abuse case. If you were a snitch, I was drawing blood on you, but at the same time, I'm praying to God and asking him to forgive me and, for all the things that I had done. And I had just reached the point where I'm like, man, I'm being a hypocrite. How can I sit here and ask God to forgive me for all that I've done? And at the same time, I'm crucifying everybody else for everything that they had done, So I'm like, what are the extra steps that I need to take to be able to get right and get good with God? I was going through a mental and a spiritual transition. I wasn't even prepared for it, but I did embrace it, because I always wanted something different. I just didn't know where to start. I didn't know, what the steps were, and I wasn't willing to really make the sacrifices because, that meant that I had to go all the way back to childhood and tell myself that everything that I taught was incorrect. You know what I'm saying? My parents were raised a certain way to be able to survive during a certain time, and when I started doing all this internal work and started, knowledge of self, understanding of self, knowing my parents, my father, my mother, their strengths, their weaknesses, because whatever was in them was in me. And I wanted to learn how to manage. I wanted something different. The prison system does not discriminate. It locks up people from all walks of life. You had business owners in there. You had bankers. You had real estate people. You had political people. You had a lot of people in there. And I always wondered, like, what is the difference between them and me? You know what I'm saying? My people, your people, our community, your community. Why is there poor people? Why is there rich people? What is it that you have that I don't have, And everything was about long-term with successful people. Everything they did, they prepared for the future. They pre-planned and pre-prepared for their kids to be successful. They invested, they saved money, and things like that. We were never taught anything like that. Even when we were selling drugs, we were never taught about investments or what to do with the money. We were just taught to survive, I didn't know how to plan or prepare for the future because I didn't even know if we were going to make it past tomorrow. Poverty was a way of life for us. We were impoverished mentally. I know today that, I work over here in Corktown and, you see all the new development going on in the community and it's great and it's beautiful, but we still need to work on the people and the mindset, the impoverished mindset that people still have in our community to be able to evolve and catch up with the changes that are going on in the environment. So, as I got to know myself and I started going on this spiritual journey with myself and learning my strengths and my own weaknesses and, just evaluating my whole life, my whole situation, what led me to juvenile, how did I end up here, how did I end up there? And, throughout my life, all I can remember is just suffering, and at the time, it just didn't make sense. I used to feel like God didn't love me. God wasn't hearing my prayers. And one day I sat down with a Christian. I was having a bad day, and this Christian man, he seen it on me. I sat down with him, and he was like, man, it's all over you. What's going on with you? And I was just like in distress because I'm like, man, I'm just trying to do right. I'm trying to do things right, and I keep praying, and I feel like God ain't hearing my prayers. And he was like, you know what, man, if you don't mind me asking, what is it that you pray for? What is it that you ask God for? I said, well, I ask him for strength. You know what I'm saying? Every time I pray, you know, for strength to be able to endure the conditions, the circumstances, the situations that I'm dealt with. And he said, well, when you go into the weight pit, you know, what do you do to get yourself stronger? I said, well, you know, I add on more weight, you know what I'm saying? And you know, that's how you get stronger, you know? And he was like, well, that's what God's doing. God's answering your prayers. Every time you ask for strength, he's putting more pressure on you. He's putting more problems on you. He's putting more challenges and obstacles in your way to build your strength. He was like, you got to learn how to articulate yourself when you're talking to God because he hear you. You just got to know what you asking for. And I was like, dang, the light bulb went up. I said, oh, no, I got to start talking to God different. I got to start asking for a break. I need relief. I need a hug. I need love. I don't need no more strength right now. I'm strong enough for sure. Yup. So as I was going through this transition, my spirit was feeling very restless. I started to really feel out of place, you know. There was a point in time where I felt like I was right where I was supposed to be, you know. But then I started going through this transition about 12 years later into my sentence, and I just felt very restless, you know. And but I embraced it, you know, and I said, well, God's doing his part, so I got to do mine. So I started rolling up my sleeves, and I realized if I wanted to, you know, live a different life, and I wanted to be successful, and I didn't want to come home and be a burden, but I wanted to be an asset to my family, to my community, to society, you know, and I started to have to change. I had to do a lot of changes, and, you know, I had to change the way I walk, the way I talk, the music I listen to, the books that I'm reading, the TV shows that I'm having, the conversations that I'm having, the crowd that I'm around. You know, I had to change all those types of things, and, you know, I had been so loyal, you know, and having a good heart, you know. There was a point in my life where I resented myself and I resented my own heart because I felt like I should never feel bad about doing something good. And I was like, why do good people always get messed over? And I'm always getting messed over, lied to, betrayed by the people that I love the most. You know what I'm saying? And it just really got frustrating for me. But once I was able to go back and make peace with myself and forgive others and learned how to forgive myself, and you know, my journey got a lot lighter. You know, I had a lot more understanding about life, people, places, things, learning what I can and I can't control, you know, and you know, I started investing in educating myself. I read a book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It was a complete game changer for me, you know, because it gave me back my power. It taught me that I have the power and the ability to be able to make those changes. So all of a sudden, prior to me making all these adjustments, I looked at myself and I looked at my environment. When I picked the star off the wall, it says, change your world. That was the star on there. And it was so attractive to me because I was able to change my world and change my situation and my conditions by reading this book because you know, I woke up one day and I decided I'm not going to be a prisoner today. I'm going to be a student. You know, I woke up and I said, I'm not in prison anymore. I am in school. I am in college, and I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity to learn something, to teach somebody something, you know, and it really worked out for me. So I pre-planned and pre-prepared to be successful prior to getting out. You know, I hit the homies up in the streets. I hit the brothers up in the joint. I had to retire my flag. Since childhood, I had devoted my whole life to the flag, to the nation. I gave you all that I got. And you know, and then, you know, after that, I got an honorable discharge. I just didn't want my love and my loyalty to be divided. I wanted to be able to love my family unconditionally, love myself unconditionally. For the first time in my life, I'm comfortable in my own skin. Thank you.
Thank you to our amazing panelists. Period. Their stories and their backgrounds and their innovative approaches to healing, these non-carceral ways of how we can center community and center healing. So thank you all for your impact and your work. And I want to open the floor to see if we have any questions about their work, their impact, or questions in general for our panelists. We can pass the mic.
Thank you so much, panel. I think all of your stories it was so enlightening, all of them. The one that particularly stood out to me was Eladio, because you remind me of my son. That was my son, Omar Warlick, and I can see a transformation in him. And like you said, your mindset was, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a student. And you get to that point where you embrace what's really going on, the reality of everything, and it was just so enlightening to hear you talk about that, and I can see that in my son because he is a different person than the person I knew before he went in. We could drive from Detroit to Chicago, he wouldn't say a word. Now he talks nonstop, and you can't stop him. And he's complimentary, and he has come to a realization of who he is. And thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you all for sharing your story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria. I want to thank the panel for your stories today and just thank everyone for your contributions to this space. Bree, thank you especially for the conversation that we had earlier about word choice. I appreciate continuing to be educated by you and everyone in this space. One thing I did want to share is that, and thank you, Dr. Camille, for the information you provided today, because we need to continue to educate people not to call the police, and what resources are available other than calling 911 and involving the police. Police need to be out of your business by any means necessary. And in the situations where police do get involved, they have too much power, more power than they're supposed to have, where they should not be extended any type of leniency whatsoever. They should be held to a higher standard by the virtue of the amount of power that they have. One thing I do want to share as well is that some people are not aware that the Detroit City Charter actually gives civilians control of the police department. And if that means that we have control of the police department, that means that we can put policy in place that takes police out of the spaces that we don't want them in, like the ones that we are talking about today and yesterday. The problem is, one of the problems is that our government officials sign union contracts that undermine that civilian control, and we have to do something about that. We absolutely have to take control of the police back. We walk around thinking that the police have control of us, and they're not supposed to. It's not designed for that. So I just really appreciate being in this space, and I'm looking forward to continuing to reimagine what the future looks like for our communities.
Hi, I'm Kim. I want to add to what Vicki said, and I want to say that we also need to continue creating the communities that we want. To create the communities that we want. They're not here, but we're in the process, and we should continue. And I'm going to say that the police should be part of our communities. They are our brothers. They are our sisters. They're our cousins and what have you. We need to get on them when they're not doing the right thing. And when the structures are not working properly, we need to address them, hold those structures accountable. But the police are people too. And so, and I'm not pro-police for sure, and police structure, because it's wrong. But they are people, and we can't totally leave them out, because how do we are the institutions. People make the institutions. So it's really about that mindset. How do we help people change their, and transform?
Yeah, I want to add to that. So I want to offer some feedback for the two of you. Thank you both for being here. So first of all, I don't necessarily like the wording around people making the institution, right? Because what makes the institution is the ideals and very specific people. They're very white and they have money and they are usually straight cis men. So it's a very particular person that oftentimes ends with the pen in hand that can sign the form saying that this is the new policy, right? The changers, the game changers, that's what I think we do. I don't think we build the institution. We are going to be the ones that change it and disrupt it. And that's where we come together, because there is way less of them than there is of us. There is way less people with the power to sign a piece of paper and change our entire lives than there are of us. So once we let go of this dichotomy that we are voiceless or hard to reach or all of these things that we're told, like, we have voices. If money was not an issue, and this is separate from ego or pride, if money was not an issue for me, I would run circles around 95% of the people on Capitol Hill making all the choices that they're making. I would run circles. Okay, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves after dealing with me. And so I think and then with the 911, right? Like, what is the alternative? Because you brought that up a little bit. Like, what about the solution? And the reality is that we don't have a secondary number to call. Like, I can recognize that we have a lack of possible solutions that can take place instead of 911. So really what we need to understand is where 911 is used, what that is actually supposed to be used for. If you think about calling 911, if that comes up for you, no, it didn't. Because if you really, really, really needed life-saving services, you wouldn't be able to stop and consider the other options, because you would be, almost getting killed. That's when you need the police. That is the only time right now that we need to be utilizing the police. And that still needs to be with the consent of the person that you're calling on, right? Like, I can identify that there isn't a place other than CPS. Mandated reporting is an antiquated idea, and we need to get rid of it, all right? And for people, yes, like, don't start with me on mandated reporting. The reality is that we have to provide within the structures that we're working in, we have to provide the leadership necessary to train our staff to know what other resources are available to them that don't have anything to do with a punishing system. Like that's what we need to lean away from.
I just wanted to follow up to Kim's point about the police. Your point is well taken, because many times people call the police erroneously. As a crisis worker, I did crisis work, I will be called because police were called on a situation that the people there should have been able to handle. Like, called to a school and the person says, yeah, this situation, she threatened to kill me, XYZ, 1, 2, 3. And I get there and I'm saying, this person seems dysregulated right now. Like, you the counselor and you out of control. And I'm like, where's the student? And I go, and they're like, they're in there. And I go in there, and it's a young woman standing on a wall, 2 police officers standing there, and they both looking pissed, like, we up in here with this kid, really because of this lady. So I'm like, you good? I'm going to just holler at the girl. They're like, go ahead. I go up there and say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And we just walk, and I said to her, let me ask you something. You know why I'm here? And you're like, no. Well, crisis. Either you a threat to harm somebody or yourself. If I wanted to harm somebody, they'd be harmed. Facts. All good. I hear you. So you do understand there's 1 or 2 ways this can go. And you can see the tears well up in her eyes, because now she's getting agitated. And I was like, look, let me ask you a question. Where'd you sleep last night? She was like, what? Like the 8th foster home in the last 3 months? Okay. So you mentioned about harming folk. If you wanted to harm, you would have harmed. Who was this person? Ms. Nana. That's the person that made the call. Yeah. Oh, well, what happened? She owned one. The lady, the counselor. Yeah, she owned one. I thought we was cool. She came in, I came in school. I don't even feel like hearing her talking about her boyfriend today. Really? Yeah. I wasn't in the mood. And I just told her, you know what, I ain't really got time for that right now. And she just went off. So I cussed out. Okay. All right. So you don't want to harm her. Miss Lady, what's your name? Camille. Miss Camille, like I said, got you. She be harmed. Real talk, you thinking about harming yourself? You just got to understand, I got to ask you these questions. That's why I'm here. And she was like, I don't want to harm nobody. I just want peace. I said, girl, me and you too. Now look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have to get suspended. Might be a good thing. So you can figure out this new house you in. Okay? Number 2, get some distance with you and Miss Lady. Even if she want to speak and holler, look like you got to go study. It's called a look busy. You have a stack of books and papers, and you be like, hey, I see you, but I got to go. Every time you see her, because she a trigger for you. Stay away from her for a while till you're done. Maybe when the school year over. Work on this suspension. In 2 days, somebody going to come see you, and they're going to say you want to follow up and what's going on with you. Okay, can you do that? Can you just leave her alone? She was like, yeah, I can do that. I said, so go on to the office, do the paperwork. Who coming to get you? Great aunt, whoever. Great. So now I got to go back to Miss Lady. I was like, everything's fine. She ain't jump on you? Who? So-and-so. Nah, ma'am. No, ma'am. I said, but I'm going to tell you something. Whatever going on with you, you might want to get that in division. Because what's going on up in here, this is not healthy. It ain't healthy for you, because I thought you was the person in distress when I got here, because you was bouncing off the walls. Well, you don't know what it's like. Da-da-da. Ma'am, in a minute they're going to be calling the people on you. You need to slow your roll. Like, seriously, whatever's going on with this child don't have nothing to do with you. You're a counselor. You're supposed to hear to de-escalate. Slow it down. Maybe you need some support. Have you talked to your supervisor? Have you said, I need this, I need that? That lady called the police because she got into an argument with a student. Okay? On a public bus, I'm coming from graduate school, pull up to the corner, and it's a group of black youth standing in the parking lot at McDonald's, and a person on the bus said, look at those criminals. Just like that. Yes, just like that. And somebody said, whoever said that, FOS. Y'all know what that means. Okay. 10 seconds later, there's a bus pulling off. 5 squad cars pulled up. Kids are running all over the place. It's obvious they're students. Their high school is right there. They got backpacks on their back. This is how people use the police. It's incorrect. It's inhuman. Because trust and believe, if I was to call the police in my neighborhood on folk, none of them look like me. It'd be a whole lot of stuff going down, and wouldn't nobody like it. And trust me, it's stuff going on. They just don't call because it look different on certain bodies. So you're right. There needs to be education about how people move through this society and what it looks like for certain people, brown and black bodies, to engage in certain behaviors because we are under surveillance.
And before we run out of time real quick, I wanted to respond. I think, was it Victoria? Are you the commissioner-elect or running for commissioner? Or is that what was going on? A candidate, yeah. So to hear somebody from law enforcement say that law enforcement is supposed to be for the people and controlled by the people is foreign to me. That's something that I have no experience with. I've never heard that before. I think, there are. No, I believe it too. I believe it too, and I'm just saying I haven't heard it before. And I think you brought up union contracts, and one solution to not having police respond is to train your dispatchers to tell people not to come out when folks call for reasons that don't require police services. So if you have officers that want overtime, and you have union contracts that demand that they go out for certain calls, then it's not on the community member for calling the police. It's on you guys for dispatching 5 squad cars out for that call. So at what point is the agency, at what point is the organization gonna address their policies and say, hey, listen, we don't respond to this kind of stuff because community members can handle it themselves. And if those policies were in place, that would open up the door for unarmed, non-police crisis response from within the community to handle all of that. And there's a lot of talk about Detroit police being over capacity and the impact that has on officers and their mental health and how they're more likely to shoot people when they're stressed out. So could you imagine reducing some of their workload to the extent where they're not stressed, they don't have to respond to these calls where they don't want to be at, and then maybe less black folks will get killed. So it is one thing to put it on the community and say, don't call the police. It's another thing to say, hey, why don't you guys make the changes that will shape the way that the community responds? Because at the end of the day, to think that we're not responding to what's coming from the top down, to think that what I think is right or wrong doesn't come from some moral indoctrination that has nothing to do with me or any of my identities is a fallacy. The morality I've been taught in this country has nothing to do with me. So at what point is it on the folks in power to start engaging some of the changes so that we can learn the truth about who we are and why we're here and what to do about it?
And we have one last question from this gentleman over here before transitioning back.
This question is for Eladio. We're going to make this quick. I know it's lunchtime. Let
No,
me
I'm
introduce
hungry.
myself. My name is Arif Naji. I founded Steps to Change. I'm involved with a few other organizations. I myself, like Eladio, was in a gang, did prison time. I was in the feds, he was in the state. And my question is, when you're working with all these kids like we do, have you ever had a moment? I had a talk with Anthony about this. I could have talked to you on the side, but I want to ask this question because it might help someone else. Recently, I've been out 3 years. Recently, I thought I had this all under control. But the old me, my club name was Scarface, is doing push-ups, waiting to come out. And I thought I had it under control. And I almost crashed. And I'm talking about crashing was like I plotted. I plotted to get back at someone. Have you ever had a situation? What I did is my phone kept on hitting, and I answered it at that time, at that moment, and I saw all the kids that I work with, and I said, I'm doing this for them. And I reached out to a few people, and then I talked about it with other individuals, and that was like a support system. What other avenue could I have taken to help?
Being around like-minded people, people who have shared in your experiences, people who have experienced the same struggle that you have gone through. You get positive input, being restored to know that, if I'm correct, you got out earlier than what you were supposed to, right?
I had 37 years.
Yeah, 37 years you were supposed to do. So every time you get ready for Scarface to come on out, you got to count your blessings, brother. You know what I'm saying? Because you could have still been in there right now serving that 37. You know what I mean? I don't take nothing for granted in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, for the first time, I'm comfortable in my own skin. I learned how to love myself, be proud of myself. My mother always taught me how to take care of people, but never taught me how to take care of myself. You know what I'm saying? So I just, to get to where I'm at today, I do not take it for granted. I made a lot of sacrifices. I had to cut a lot of ties with people who I love, people I grew up with, family, friends, loved ones, but it was necessary, you know what I'm saying? Because anything that doesn't contribute to my well-being, I can't be a part of it. You know what I'm saying?
I agree. At that moment, that trigger, you're not thinking about any of that. I didn't think about any of that. I didn't give a shit about any of that.
Because I'll tell you what, everything that you work for, bro, will be gone just like that.
Just like that.
You know what I'm saying? Just like that. One bad decision. If you make a right when you were supposed to make a left, it's over with. You know what I'm saying? I do not want to traumatize or re-traumatize my family. I don't want to suffer and put myself through that anymore. I've suffered the majority of my life. You know what I'm saying? And it's not until now that everything made sense. The suffering makes sense. It's because of my suffering suffering that I'm able to sit here and have this conversation and be on this panel. And my suffering is contributes to me being able to have community healing circles with my community and tell men from my community that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to talk, it's okay to express yourself. You know what I'm saying? That way they can learn how to deal with their anger and their emotions and things like that. It's okay, that I've seen so many people, so much division in society, community, families, things like that. And sometimes all it takes is, I'm sorry, thank you, forgive me, I forgive you, a hug, I love you, I miss you, and makes all the garbage go away, So, think about
Thank you,
that.
Eladio. I knew you would have told me these words because it was given to me by others, but I wanted to know, if anybody else experienced any of that, we could talk one-on-one, whatever, and maybe it's just opening everyone else's eyes because it almost happened to me, and I thought I had it under control.
I do want to
Thank you.
say one more thing before we close out this panel because it's been brought up a few times. One thing that I would like to see, one of the questions on that survey that was handed out was, what would you like to see in your community to feel safer? Well, first of all, less policing and less carceral response would make me feel safer. But the other part of it is we have normalized prison so deeply that even people that went to prison are like, but segregation was good for me. Like, not a single part of me being taken from my kids was ever good for me or any of them. Zero seconds. It didn't matter if I was self-reflecting in my cell. It didn't matter if I was over there praying or giving back to other people. 0.0 seconds is how many times it was good for my kids to be away from me. All right? And it was zero seconds in solitary confinement are what humans need. Now, we've normalized that system, so we do look at those moments as moments of reprieve, where, solitary confinement means I get to sleep because the noises are gone, right? Or a visitation with my kids means I get to see my kids. Never mind that it's in a jail building, in a literal building for inmates, and that's where I have to see my kids because it has to be supervised, right? Like, we have to, like, that just, it seems like it's been normalized too much. When we actually thank the moments away from our kids because I got a moment of time for me to breathe, why wasn't I worthy to get a moment of that time when my kids were still with me? Y'all waited until you took them somewhere and then said, okay, now go sit in that room. So I want us to remember that, is we can't keep normalizing this. We need to have other spaces that aren't solitary confinement in prison to be able to quiet ourselves and come back to ourselves and reflect. It should not be that level of depravity that we get to before we get a moment to slow down. Like, it can't be.
Give it up for our amazing panelists. Thank you. Thank you all for lifting up those liberatory systems of care and community. I think we're almost ready for lunch. All right? Thank you all.